If you're like me, then you probably grew up on one of these two beautiful boxes. And I really only had 3 ways of getting new games back then. Number 1, it was a holiday or my birthday. Number 2, I saved up money from holidays or birthday cards that family members would give me. Or number 3, my dad was just feeling very kind and generous and he bought me a new game. Back then, I expected games to last me a while, but not forever. Remember, during this generation, games cost $49.99, $50. I added $5 for tax and put $54.99 into 2 inflation calculators, and that means in today's money, we would be paying $95 for these games. $95 in today's money equals PS2 games, and people think we have it bad with $70 games today. $95. Hold that thought, please. I made a list of 10 GameCube games that were roughly the top 10 games on the system. I didn't add games like Melee or Animal Crossing because there's really no way of beating those games. Those are games you just play until you get bored. After getting my top 10, I then went on howlongtobeat.com, which in my many years of using is pretty accurate. Then, because my brain is too eroded to do the math myself, I went on an average calculator, put in the general playtime of all these games, trying to get an idea of what the average GameCube game playtime would be. Here are the games and here are their hour counts, and the overall average playtime for a GameCube game is 17.8 hours. Then I did the same thing for the PS2. Remember, no racing or fighting games because you don't really beat those games. Here are the games and here are the hours. 18.3 hours, so 0.5 hours of a difference. Remember, $95 in today's money for an average under 20 hours. I don't even remember game length being a conversation back then. Of course, we were less analytical as kids, and also if you got the game as a gift, then the length matters less. But even as a teenager into the Xbox 360 generation, I don't remember the conversation being that prevalent. Back then, people just kinda knew what games to buy if they wanted a really long game. Like, you would get an open world game like GTA 4 or Oblivion, or you would get an RPG like Lost Odyssey. Some of that generation's best games ever, like Dead Space, Halo Reach, the Uncharted games. Even those games were well under 20 hours, and those were $60 games. But we now live in a time where 20 hours is considered short to people. A couple of weeks ago, Stellar Blade was confirmed to have a 25-hour story, and I saw a good amount of people saying that it was way too short. One thing that always confuses me about people who say this is that they will pay $25 for a movie ticket, popcorn, and soda. Let's be honest, it's more than that unless you're going to a matinee on like a random Tuesday in a cheap, dirty theater, but we'll stick with $25. So for $25, you'll see a 2-hour movie that you don't even own, but you won't pay 3 times that money for a game that lasts 25 or 30 hours? Over 10 times the amount of that movie length? 3 times the amount of money, 10 times the amount of entertainment. And you own the game, and you can replay it whenever you want, or sell it, or trade it in. The math just doesn't add up. So, how did this happen? Final Fantasy VII is a top 5 game for me. The story and characters just feel like a part of me. That's how much they mean to me. I've played this game a bunch, and I replayed it last summer and I beat it, and I got the ultimate weapons for Cloud, Vincent, Yuffie, and Tifa, and I set aside a couple of extra hours for grinding. Alright, let's just see something real quick. PS1 memory card. Okay, where the hell are you? Final Fantasy VII. 35 hours. 35 hours. That's how long it took me to get the ultimate weapons for 4 of my characters and do grinding. It's a 35-hour game. Maybe 40, I don't know. When the Final Fantasy VII Remake project was announced, I was excited but skeptical. How can you turn one 40-hour game, 36 hours on howlongtobeat.com, into 3 40-hour games? Because remember, if you just mainline Remake, it'll be about 30 hours, and Rebirth is around 40. So if I had to guess what the final game will be, I'm gonna say another 40. So again, the question remains, how can you turn a 40-hour story into a 120-hour story without making the player feel like they're being artificially slowed down? Well, the answer is you can't. It's just not possible. I have such mixed feelings on Remake and Rebirth. Seeing certain iconic scenes being remade in modern graphics makes me borderline cry with joy. I am so happy that the character designs, voices, and scenery are being perfectly done. But there's so many times that these games want to slow me down with problems that just don't feel naturally connected to the main story. Before Rebirth came out, I decided to play the intermission DLC, where after having so much fun in the beginning, the game stops and slows me down to play a board game that I just don't want to play. I understand that the developers put effort into this minigame, but I don't want to play it. One could argue that it's world building. Me? I would argue that they needed a way to get a few extra minutes out of an already short DLC. There's another part like that later in the DLC where it just feels like padding. You can just smell the padding. And to be fair, there are moments in the original Final Fantasy VII that do feel like a detour, like the Don Corneo Wall Market segment. But that doesn't feel like padding to me because it further establishes the city of Midgar as a character by allowing the player to explore one of its grossest slums, and it quickly sets up the Tifa and Aerith friendship. But Remake and Rebirth, the detours that the characters go on, they just lack that magic. A lot of their side content, there's just no magnetic pull that feels natural. Want to help the most boring Square Enix character ever? Want to get involved with some incredibly bland NPCs and their fetch quests? No. Fuck off. Fuck off. I'm Cloud with a gigantic sword. Let me do the thing I bought the game for. Oh hey look, a new Spider-Man game. I sure can't wait to play as Mary Jane. Mary Jane. I can't believe they did that again in the sequel. Like, what the fuck? To me, the biggest sign that Rebirth had too much padding was around the middle of the game. So very light spoilers because again, this part really does not matter. There's this part where your team is taken hostage by some losers under the gold saucer, which doesn't really make any sense because Tifa could probably fuck all of these people up with both arms tied behind her back. But anyway, you have to win a chocobo race to get your team back. So first you gotta find the chocobo, which is pretty easy, but he's not ready to race because he's hungry. So you have to find some greens for him to eat. But in order to get the greens, you have to do mini games for each one. After doing 3 mini games and feeding your chocobo 3 greens, then you can do the race. And after doing all of that and getting your team back like an hour later, you know what the first thing they say is?
There's no way Barrett shot those people, right?
Are there any other gun-armed dudes who might have gone on a killing spree?
We know him. He'd never do that.
Well, we'll find out soon enough.
They don't even talk about what just happened to them or what you just did for the past hour because it doesn't matter. The game knows it doesn't matter. And so should you. Think of any great piece of entertainment, whether it be a movie, a book, or a video game, as a great meal. Part of a great meal is pacing yourself how you like. If you want to eat all of the main content before you get to your side dishes, you should be able to. But it feels like the chef took the side dishes and just fucking smushed them on top of the main dish and is forcefully shoveling it all into your mouth at the same time. You ever see somebody eat and you're like, wow, you eat so slow, or wow, you eat so fast. What matters most is that they're enjoying themselves. And with games today, it feels like that element is gone. I really think the reason developers do this shit is so the reviews can be like 30 hours main story and 20 hours of side content. Meanwhile, what you actually just did was put some of the side content into the main story, and if you trim that fat, it would be closer to a 25-hour main story. But then you would have people saying it's too short and not worth $70. Remember, $95 for a PS2 game. Listen, I love Rebirth. It's currently my game of the year. I'm only using it as an example simply because it's the most recent one that I can think of. I understand that a narrative-heavy game should have world building and established character motives and backgrounds, but a game should be feeding the player the core gameplay, the quality content, the main dish, at a consistent rate. Content, let's stick with that word. Everybody's favorite C word right now. content. If you're watching this video, I think there's maybe two ways that you look at video games, and I want to preface, neither of these is right or wrong. The first way you might look at video games is you just see games as content. Something to do in your free time, maybe after a long day of work. Totally valid. You want to spend your money on something that'll last a while. I get it. The second way is the way I personally see games, is as art. I really do mean it from the bottom of my heart that I see video games as the best and most engaging art form ever. They combine music, reading, acting, and interactivity into one incredible form of entertainment. I just really want every game to be the best it can be. So it invites me to replay it and soak up every detail. It's like a great album. You just want to keep listening to it over and over again until you hear a lyric or an instrument that you've never focused on before. Let me ask you a question. Did you buy Spider-Man 2 so you could be Spider-Man and swing around New York and beat up the bad guys? Or did you buy Spider-Man because you wanted to be Mary Jane? And I get it. Somebody's gonna say, well, it's a good way to break up the action. Here's the thing though. If I want my Spider-Man action to be broken up, I'll switch to another game where I'm not Spider-Man. It's that easy. Okay, last question. In a few more years, when the whole Final Fantasy VII remake project is over and the whole trilogy is out, do you think, after you beat it, you're really going to remember moments like the one I described before? Or do you think you're just going to remember the big plot moments, the moments that they remade from the PS1 original, and the other new, original, exciting moments that they put into the game? Or do you think you're just gonna remember these small detours? Obviously, you can't remember every moment of every game, but it feels like being memorable wasn't even important to Square Enix at certain parts of this game. Just look at that dude Johnny or that weirdo under the gold saucer. It feels like they just said, let's give this character a weird, quirky personality. They'll remember that. Whoa, I'm so quirky. Can you help me? Yeah, I do remember that, just not for a good reason. And so many games do stuff like this now. They just slow you down. Or they go on for too long. Red Dead Redemption 2 and The Last of Us Part 2 are some of the best games I've ever played in my life. But both of those games have a few hours that could have been trimmed out for a tighter, more compact game. To use the music analogy again, if I have any hip hop fans watching this, you know how like every album now has a deluxe version which is like 2.5 fucking hours and half the songs suck ass? What's the point? Just make it a 13 song album and call it a day. Just keep all of the bangers on the album and get rid of the B-sides. So is this topic just me bitching about something because I think games are too long? Or do I think it's a real problem? We're approaching a pretty historic moment in the games industry. AI is unfortunately going to be used more and more. Game budgets are way too high. Game development times are way too long. Think about how long it's going to be between Persona 5 and Persona 6. Think about that 6-year wait between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. We still haven't had a sequel to Skyrim, and that came out 13 years ago. And sadly, worst of all, the people who make these games for us to enjoy don't even have stable jobs. The amount of layoffs is mind-blowing. Take-Two just had layoffs and they're going to be publishing GTA 6 next year. GTA 6. That game is going to be a money printer for a solid decade, an ATM, and they had layoffs. And listen, I'm not ignorant enough to think that what I'm about to say is going to be the ultimate solution. But here's an idea to save some money and cut down on some development time. Trim the fat, cut down on the fluff. Stop worrying that people won't buy your game if it's only 20 hours. Because 20 hours is still an incredibly solid experience. Because there are millions of people out there who have jobs, second jobs, kids, responsibilities that make it really hard for them to play these gargantuan games. And it is very rare that a 30 or 40 plus hour game earns that playtime, because unfortunately the devs have to mix quality and non-quality content. And listen, I know that there are games with good side quests and good content, but in my experience, it's like 1 in 5 games, like 20%. It's pretty rare. It's always something like, man, how am I gonna open up my shop when I don't have any items in stock? Unless You, traveler, would you find me some items? It's just boring, man. It's fucking boring. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good day. Let me know what you think in the comments below.